The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under Audrey Callahan's apartment door like something meant to go unnoticed. No envelope, no stamp. Just a cream-colored card with gold lettering that read, "Connor Whitfield and Sloan Mercer request the pleasure of your company." Audrey had stood in her small Brooklyn kitchen, still in her work uniform, holding that card for 4 full minutes before she set it down next to her coffee mug and said out loud to no one, "Absolutely not." But that was 3 weeks ago. Now it was 4:47 in the afternoon, and she was walking through the front entrance of the River Cafe in Brooklyn, wearing the only formal dress she owned, a navy blue wrap dress she had bought 3 years ago for a work event and never replaced. Simple, clean, not a single detail that would make anyone look twice. That was intentional. The River Cafe was exactly the kind of place Connor loved. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River, the Brooklyn Bridge suspended in the background like a painting that refused to believe it was real. Autumn light hitting the water in long gold stripes. Every table dressed in white linen, every glass catching the last of the afternoon sun. It was beautiful. Audrey hated that it was beautiful. She gave her name to the host at the entrance. He scrolled down his printed list with one finger, paused, scrolled back up, and then looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has found a problem they do not want to explain. "Callahan," he said. "Table 14. He handed her a small card. Her name was written on it in careful cursive. Except it wasn't her name. It said, Audra, not Audrey. Audra. Audrey looked at the card for a long moment. Connor had dated her for 4 years. He knew her name. He knew the exact way she took her coffee, the specific side of the bed she slept on, the fact that she hated being called anything other than her full name. This was not a typo. She folded the card once, slipped it into her small clutch, and walked toward table 14, which was, as she had somehow already known it would be, positioned directly beside the kitchen door. Somewhere across the room, a man in a dark suit watched her walk in and set down his glass of water very slowly. 4 years is a long time to love someone who is quietly keeping score. Audrey had not understood that about Connor Whitfield in the beginning. In the beginning, he had been charming in the specific way that careful men are charming. Attentive, curious, interested in the small details of her life that most people skipped past. He remembered how she took her coffee. He asked follow-up questions. He showed up. They met at a book launch in the West Village. One of those crowded literary events where everyone holds a glass of wine and pretends to have read more than they have. Audrey had been standing near the back, actually reading the first chapter of the featured book, when Connor appeared beside her and said, "You're the only person in this room doing what we're all supposed to be doing." She had laughed. He had stayed. For the first year, everything felt like proof that the right person existed and sometimes actually showed up. Connor was a corporate attorney at a midtown firm, ambitious in the way that Manhattan men tend to be, but he seemed to balance it. He cooked on Sundays. He came to her work events. He told her once, in the easy tone of someone stating a fact, "You're the most real person I've ever met." Audrey had held on to that sentence for a long time. It took her almost 2 more years to understand what he actually meant by it. Real, in Connor's vocabulary, was not a compliment. It was a category. Real meant grounded. Real meant Brooklyn apartment and Barnes and Noble and freelance editing jobs that paid inconsistently. Real meant not quite fitting into the world he was building. The midtown lunches, the client dinners at places with no prices on the menu, the Upper East Side charity events where everyone wore things that cost more than Audrey's monthly rent. Real meant temporary. The breakup happened on a Wednesday evening in March. No raised voices, no dramatic moment. Connor sat down at her kitchen table, folded his hands the way he did in depositions, and explained, calmly, rationally, with the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed, that he needed someone who matched where he was going. Audrey did not cry. She walked to the closet, pulled out the gray cardigan of his that had been hanging there for 8 months, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table between them. Then she held the door open. Connor picked up the sweater on his way out and said, "You'll be fine. You always land on your feet." And somehow, that was the cruelest thing he ever said to her. Table 14 was worse than Audrey had imagined. It was tucked into the far left corner of the reception hall, but close enough to the kitchen that she could hear the muffled clattering of plates and the sharp voices of catering staff calling orders to each other. The nearest window was partially blocked by a large floral arrangement that had clearly been placed as an afterthought. A column of white roses so tall it obstructed the view entirely. Diane was already there, sitting with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the expression she reserved for situations she found personally offensive. "Table 14, Diane said when Audrey sat down. "I want you to know I checked. There are only 14 tables. This is the last one. They put us at the literal last table." "I see that. And your name card says Audra." "I noticed." Diane picked up the card, looked at it, set it back down. "He did that on purpose." "I know. I should not have talked you into coming." "You absolutely should not have," Audrey agreed pleasantly, and reached for the water glass in front of her. She was doing well. She had a plan for the evening: drink water, eat whatever the catering staff set in front of her, smile at anyone who made eye contact, and leave before the dancing started. It was a solid plan. She had rehearsed it on the subway ride over. The plan lasted approximately 6 minutes. That was when Bree Whitfield came by. Bree was Connor's cousin, 34, sharp-faced, the kind of woman who had never needed to develop a filter because no one in her family had ever asked her to. She was wearing a champagne-colored dress that cost more than Audrey's rent and carrying a glass of white wine like a prop. She stopped at table 14. She looked at Audrey. And then, in a voice pitched perfectly to carry to the surrounding tables without technically being a shout, she said, "Oh, wow, you actually came? That's brave of you." The tables nearby went quiet in that particular way, where people are pretending they did not hear while hearing everything perfectly. Audrey looked up at Bree and gave her the smile. The steady, unreadable one she had spent 4 years developing. "It's a beautiful venue," she said simply. "Congratulations to the family." Bree blinked, clearly expecting something more reactive. Then she moved on. Diane leaned close the moment Bree was out of earshot. "I want to tip her champagne onto that dress so badly." Audrey said nothing, but under the table, and her hand was pressing flat against her knee to stop it from shaking. Audrey was studying the centerpiece, counting rose stems, which was something she did when she needed to look occupied without actually being occupied. When someone pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. She assumed it was Diane returning from the bar. She did not look up immediately. "For what it's worth," said a voice that was not Diane's, "I asked to be moved to this table." Audrey looked up. Reed Calloway had not changed much in 2 years. He was still lean and a little angular, the kind of build that suggested someone who moved through the world efficiently rather than impressively. Dark suit, no tie. The top button of his shirt undone in a way that looked like a deliberate choice rather than carelessness. And he was holding a glass of sparkling water, no alcohol, and looking at her with an expression she could not immediately read. They had not spoken since the week after Connor ended things. A brief, uncomfortable phone call where Reed had said he was sorry, and Audrey had said thank you, and neither of them had said any of the things that actually needed saying. "You didn't have to do that," Audrey said carefully. "I know." He set his glass down. "I wanted to." She studied him for a moment. Reed had been Connor's best friend since their first year at Cornell. He had been part of every significant moment in her relationship: dinners, holidays, the one road trip to Vermont where the car broke down, and all four of them spent 6 hours in a gas station waiting for a tow truck. He had been present for almost all of it, on which meant he had known things, possibly for longer than she had. She picked up her water glass and turned to face him fully. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Did you know he was going to propose to her the week after we broke up?" Reed did not look away. He did not shift in his seat or reach for his drink. He simply held her gaze, and the steadiness of it was its own kind of answer. He did not say yes, but he did not say no. The silence sat between them like a third person at the table. Audrey nodded slowly, the way you nod when something you already suspected is confirmed. She looked back toward the head table, where Connor was standing with his hand on Sloane's waist, laughing at something one of the groomsmen had said. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Anna, were you planning to keep that to yourself?" Diane reappeared at the table 20 minutes later, set 2 glasses of champagne down harder than necessary, and said, "Bathroom. Now. Both of us." Reed half rose from his chair instinctively. "Not you," Diane said. Not unkindly, but with absolute clarity. In the hallway leading to the restrooms, marble floors, soft lighting, the muffled sound of the string quartet carrying from the main hall, Diane turned to face Audrey and held out her phone without a word. It was an Instagram story, posted 43 minutes ago by an account Audrey did not recognize. A private profile with no profile photo and a username that was just a string of numbers. The story was a photo, taken from across the room, slightly blurred at the edges in the way phone photos taken without flash tend to be in low light. It was Audrey, sitting alone at table 14 before Reed had arrived. Her posture was straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes aimed at the centerpiece. She looked composed, she looked dignified. The caption said, "The ex who couldn't move on showed up LOL." There was a small laughing emoji at the end. Audrey stared at the screen. The story had 412 views. 412 people had already seen this photo of her sitting alone at her ex-boyfriend's wedding with a mocking caption underneath it. Her chest tightened. She breathed through it. "Someone in that room posted this," Diane said. Her voice was controlled in the specific way it got when she was genuinely furious rather than performatively furious. "Mike's, I've been trying to figure out who for the last 20 minutes. She took the phone back, tapped the screen several times, then turned it around again. The location tag on the story read, "The River Cafe, Brooklyn." Below that, Diane had pulled up the venue's seating map on the event website, a public link on the wedding's RSVP page. She pointed to a small dot near the center of the room. "Table 3, Bree Whitfield's assigned seat." Audrey looked at the map, then at the story, then back at the map. She thought about Bree's champagne-colored dress and her perfectly timed comment, and the way she had paused just long enough at table 14 for maximum effect. This was not a spontaneous act. This was planned. Someone had wanted her to feel small tonight from the moment she walked in. "Don't do anything yet," Audrey said quietly. Diane looked at her. "You have a plan?" Audrey picked up her champagne glass. "Not yet," but I will. It happened during the cocktail hour, when Sloane was pulled away for a series of formal photographs with her parents near the window overlooking the bridge. Connor moved through the room the way he always did. Unhurried, easy, stopping to clasp shoulders and lean in for jokes, working the space like someone who had been doing it since childhood. Because he had been. He reached table 14 with a glass of red wine in his hand, and the particular expression he used when he wanted to appear casual, and was working very hard at it. Reed saw him coming. His posture changed almost imperceptibly, a slight straightening, a stillness. Connor did not look at Reed. He pulled out the chair across from Audrey and sat down, uninvited, and as though the gesture were a courtesy rather than a transgression. "I'm glad you came," he said. His voice was warm. It was always warm. "You look great. Exactly the same." Audrey held his gaze. She had thought about this moment many times. What she would feel? What she would say? She had expected something sharp and overwhelming. Instead, she felt something closer to clarity. She understood now what exactly the same meant. It meant, you haven't changed. It meant, you're still in Brooklyn, still in the same job, still in the same life I walked away from because it wasn't going anywhere. It was the sentence of a man who needed to confirm that his decision had been the correct one. "How's the bookstore?" he asked. There it was, friendly, light, devastating. "Busy," she said. "How's the prenup?" A pause, very brief, a fraction of a second where something crossed his face, surprise, recalibration, before the easy smile reasserted itself. "Sorry?" "I said, how's the firm?" Audrey said, her tone unchanged. "The Midtown office. How's business?" Connor looked at her for a moment as though trying to determine what she actually knew. Then he smiled again, the one that didn't reach his eyes. "Busy," he echoed. "It's good. Everything's good." He stood, adjusted his jacket. "I just wanted to say hello. I'm glad you're here, Audrey. Genuinely." He walked away. Reed watched him go. Then he looked at Audrey. "You said prenup," he said quietly. Audrey kept her eyes on Connor's retreating back. "I know what I said." The balcony off the side corridor was narrow and cold. October in Brooklyn had a specific kind of bite to it. The kind that came off the East River and found every gap in your clothing. Audrey wrapped her arms around herself and leaned against the railing, looking down at the dark water. Reed stood beside her. He had followed her out without being asked. She had not told him not to. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the reception filtered through the glass doors behind them. The string quartet had transitioned to something with piano, low and romantic and deeply inappropriate given the conversation Audrey was about to have. "Show me," she said. Reed reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He opened a text thread and held it out to her. The message from Connor was 3 days old, dated the Wednesday before the wedding. It read, "Reed, if Audrey gets emotional tonight, handle it before it becomes a scene. But you know how she gets. She was always unstable. I just don't want Sloane's day ruined." Audrey read it once. Then she read it again more slowly, the way she read contracts, looking for the layers under the surface language. She handed the phone back. "How long has he been telling people that about me?" Reed put the phone away. He looked out at the bridge. "Since the week after you two broke up. He needed a version of events that made sense, that made him look like he'd made a reasonable decision. And unstable was the word he chose. It was the word that stuck." Audrey absorbed this quietly. Outside, a boat moved slowly under the bridge, its running lights reflecting in long streaks across the water. "My editor job," she said. "The position at Thornfield Press. I was let go 14 months ago. My supervisor called me in and said there were concerns about my reliability. My emotional reliability, specifically. I never knew where that came from." Reed was very still. "You know now," he said. His voice was low and flat. "Yes," Audrey said. "I know now." She turned to look at him fully. In the cold light from the river, she could see that he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Did you repeat it?" she asked. "The unstable thing. To anyone?" "No." "But you heard it?" "Yes." "And you didn't call me?" The wind moved off the river between them. Reed said, "No, I didn't call you. And I've thought about that every single day since." Audrey did not cry. She had made that decision a long time ago, not as a performance of strength, but as a practical matter. Crying in front of people who had caused her pain gave them something she was not willing to give. So she stood on the balcony in the October cold with the East River moving below her and spoke in a calm, even voice, and told Reed Calloway the things she had never said out loud to anyone except Diane. After Connor left, she had $2,400 in her savings account. Her rent was $1,800 a month. She had been contributing 70% of the household expenses for the last year of the relationship. Something she had not noticed happening gradually until it had already happened completely. After the breakup, she had 2 weeks before rent was due. She had called her mother. Her mother had a new family in Arizona and a rebuilt life that had no natural room in it for a 30-year-old daughter's financial emergency. The call lasted 4 minutes. She had increased her hours at Barnes & Noble. She had taken every freelance editing job she could find, working until 2 in the morning on manuscripts that paid 2 cents a word. She had eaten mostly rice and beans and the slightly past-date produce from the discount bin near the store's entrance. And then, 14 months ago, she had lost the Thornfield position, the one real salaried editorial job she had managed to build, because someone had made a phone call about her emotional reliability. 14 months of rebuilding. From scratch, again. Reed listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know he'd gone that far," he said. "I'm not the phone call to your employer. I didn't know about that." "Would it have changed anything if you had known?" Reed opened his mouth, closed it. He was, she had always noticed, a man who did not answer questions he wasn't sure of. She had found that quality irritating once. Right now, she found it the only honest thing in the building. "I don't know," he said finally. "I want to say yes, but I don't know." Audrey nodded. "At least that's true," she said. "That's more than most people in there have given me tonight." The knock at the door of the small hospitality suite was soft, almost hesitant. Not Diane's knock, which tended toward urgent. Not the brisk rap of hotel staff. Audrey opened the door. Sloane Mercer stood in the hallway in her wedding dress. Not a bride in the middle of her reception, every detail perfect. On every curl intact, the gown pressed and present and doing exactly what it was designed to do. She had a glass of champagne in one hand that she had clearly not been drinking. Her eyes were calm in the deliberate way that eyes are calm when someone is working very hard to keep them that way. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I need to ask you something." Audrey stepped back from the door. Sloane came in, looked briefly at Diane, and then sat down in the small armchair near the window. She placed her champagne on the side table. Then she opened the iPad she had been holding under her arm and set it on the coffee table between them. "Someone sent this to me an hour ago from an anonymous email address," she said. "I need to know if it's real." The screen showed an email. The sender was a midtown law firm, not Connor's firm, but a separate practice, smaller, the kind used for personal matters rather than corporate ones. The recipient was listed as Connor Whitfield. The subject line was Asset Protection Clause, Draft 3. Audrey read it. She read it the way she read every document. Slowly, completely, holding each sentence long enough to understand not just what it said, but what it was trying to do. The email outlined a prenuptial agreement structure. Specifically, it outlined a series of clauses designed to protect Connor's existing and future assets in the event of a divorce initiated within the first 5 years of marriage. The language was careful. The intentions were not. Sloane was watching her face. "You read contracts," Sloane said quietly. It wasn't a question. Diane had apparently been talking. "Sometimes," Audrey said. "Oh, is it what I think it is?" Audrey looked up from the iPad. She looked at Sloane, at this woman she had spent 4 years thinking of abstractly, almost mythologically, as the reason her life had been rearranged without her consent. Sloane looked back at her, not as a rival, as a person asking for the truth. "Yes," Audrey said. "It's exactly what you think it is." The suite was quiet. Outside, the muffled bass line of the reception's first dance song had begun, something slow and orchestral, designed for photographs. Sloane sat with her hands folded in her lap, very still. Diane stood near the window with her arms crossed, watching Audrey with an expression that was equal parts concern and focused attention. Audrey read the email a second time. Then she scrolled up through the thread to find the previous exchange. "May I?" she asked, nodding toward the iPad. Sloane pushed it across the table. Audrey worked through the document methodically. She was not a lawyer. She had never studied contract law. But 14 years of reading manuscripts, finding the gaps in logic, the buried meanings, the sentences that said one thing on the surface and something entirely different underneath, had given her a very particular skill set. She found the first flag in the 3rd paragraph, a definition clause that broadened the scope of separate property in a way that would capture assets Sloane had owned before the marriage. Not obvious, tucked inside a longer sentence about joint accounts. She found the second in the footnotes, a clause that tied the timeline of asset division to a specific sequence of events, one of which was described in language so vague it could be interpreted almost any way Connor needed it to be. She found the third in a cross-reference to a document that wasn't included in the thread, a reference so brief it looked like a formatting artifact. It was not. She explained each one to Sloane in plain language, not to be impressive, because Sloane deserved to understand what she had almost signed. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Sloane looked at the iPad for a long moment. Then she looked up at Audrey. "He told me this was standard," she said. Her voice had the careful flatness of someone processing information that was too large to fully feel yet. "It isn't," Audrey said. Diane uncrossed her arms and moved to the door. "Mom, Sloane," she said. "Your father is a senior partner at one of the top 5 firms in New York." Sloane blinked. "You need to call him," Diane said. "Right now, before you go back out there." Sloane picked up her phone. Her hand was completely steady. And that, somehow, was the most frightening thing Audrey had seen all night. Marcus Mercer was 58 years old and had spent 31 of those years in courtrooms and boardrooms that most attorneys only read about in trade publications. He had the particular stillness of a man who had long since learned that the people who spoke loudest in a room were rarely the ones who controlled it. He had been in the suite next door. Audrey did not know this until the connecting door opened, quietly, without dramatics. And Marcus stepped through, still in his formal jacket, a glass of bourbon in one hand that he had apparently been nursing for some time. He looked at his daughter first, a long, careful look that communicated several things at once, without saying any of them aloud. Then he looked at the iPad on the table. Sloane handed it to him without being asked. Marcus read it. He did not read quickly. He read the way Audrey had read it, thoroughly, returning to specific sections, his expression giving nothing away. After approximately 4 minutes, he set the iPad down and took out his phone. He made one call, 2 sentences. Then he ended the call and put the phone back in his jacket pocket. Only then did he look at Audrey. "What do you do?" he asked. Not dismissively, simply. "I work at a bookstore," Audrey said. "And I do copy editing freelance." "You found 3 structural anomalies in a contract written by a competent attorney in under 10 minutes. It's similar to manuscript editing," she said. "You learn to find the places where the language is working too hard to say too little." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My firm has been restructuring its contract review division," he said. "We have a gap between our legal team and our communications team. We've been looking for someone who reads the way you just read." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, clean white, embossed, simple. "Call Monday." He turned back to his daughter. The conversation with Audrey was apparently complete. Audrey held the card in both hands and said nothing. Diane, standing behind her, placed one quiet hand on her shoulder, and neither of them fully understood yet what had just happened. But they both understood it was significant. The first dance had ended. The lights in the main hall had warmed slightly, the shift from ceremony formality to reception ease. Guests were moving between tables. The string quartet had paused while the DJ set up. There was a loose, celebratory looseness to the room that made what happened next land with the particular force of something unexpected in a comfortable space. Sloane walked back into the reception hall at 8:22 p.m. She did not look like a woman who had just had her wedding evening rearranged. She walked the way she always walked, composed, graceful, the kind of posture that came from years of being told to carry yourself well. Her dress was still perfect. Her hair was still perfect. She crossed the floor to the center of the room, where the sweetheart table was set up near the window overlooking the bridge. Connor saw her coming. He was mid-conversation with 2 men Audrey did not recognize, and something in Sloane's posture made him pause. A flicker of assessment crossing his face so quickly that only someone who knew his tells would catch it. Sloane reached the sweetheart table. She picked up her champagne flute. She turned to face the room in the gentle way that someone does when they are about to make a toast. The room quieted naturally, expecting a speech. Sloane reached down. She picked up the small velvet tray that held the wedding rings, both of them, that had been placed there for the ring exchange ceremony later in the evening. She removed her engagement ring from her left hand. She placed it on the velvet tray. Then she looked at Connor. "Your attorney sent his draft notes to the wrong Mercer," she said. Her voice was completely even, not loud, not theatrical, just clear. "Our last names are similar. His email came to my father's inbox instead." The room was absolutely still. "I think we need to have a different conversation before this evening goes any further." Connor's face had gone a particular color that Audrey, from across the room, recognized as the color of a man whose architecture is collapsing in real time. He looked toward the spot where Reed was standing. The instinct of a man who had always had someone to manage his problems. And Reed looked back at him and did not move. The moment lasted no more than 4 seconds. But in a room that had gone completely quiet, and 4 seconds was long enough for everyone to understand exactly what was happening. Connor looked at Reed with a particular expectation of a man who had spent 10 years assuming that loyalty was a fixed quantity, something that accumulated through shared history and did not expire. His eyes communicated a clear and practiced message. Fix this. Reed set down his glass. He crossed the floor toward Connor. Unhurried, the room watched. He stopped when he was close enough that the words he was about to say did not need to carry. He put one hand briefly on Connor's shoulder, the gesture a person makes before saying something that will not be easy to hear. Connor began to relax slightly. He had felt that hand on his shoulder many times before. It had always preceded support. "I've been your best man for 10 years, Reed said. Quietly, evenly, not performing for the room, but not hiding from it either. You're one of the most capable people I've ever known, and I've watched you use that for a long time to get things you wanted without accounting for what you were taking from other people." Connor's expression shifted, a warning. "I can't stand next to this," Reed said. "I'm sorry." He stepped back from Connor. He turned and walked across the room. Every eye tracked him. He moved without hesitation directly to table 14, where Audrey was sitting with her hands folded on the white linen, watching him approach with an expression that gave nothing away. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. The room began, slowly, to exhale. Conversations restarted in low murmurs. People looked away from Connor, which was in some ways worse than continued staring, and being the subject of a room's fascination was something Connor could manage. Being the subject of a room's polite discomfort was something else entirely. Audrey looked at Reed. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Reed said, "I should have done that 2 years ago." And Audrey said, "Yes, you should have." But the way she said it was not cruel. It was simply true. Diane had been waiting for this for approximately 3 hours. She had the patience of a person who understood timing, who knew that the right moment used correctly was worth more than 10 moments used too early. She had spent the last 40 minutes after Audrey and Reed returned to table 14 doing something quiet and methodical on her phone. She had not explained what. She had only said when Audrey asked, "We give me until the room is already paying attention." The room was now paying attention. The DJ had paused between songs. Marcus Mercer and Connor had moved to a side room, quietly, officially, with the body language of a conversation that was not optional. 2 of Sloane's aunts had gently redirected the more curious guests back toward the bar. The formal structure of the evening had dissolved into the particular social holding pattern of a reception, where everyone knows something significant has happened and no one is quite sure what comes next. Diane stood up. She crossed to the far side of the room, where the wedding's digital display, a large screen near the DJ booth that had been cycling through engagement photos all evening, was temporarily static. She said something brief to the AV technician, and a young man who had been watching the room's events with the wide-eyed attention of someone who had not been briefed that this was the job he was showing up to tonight. He hesitated. Diane showed him her phone. He hesitated again. Then he took the cable she offered and connected it. The engagement photos disappeared. In their place, the Instagram story. Audrey, alone at table 14, composed and dignified in her navy dress. The caption reading "The ex who couldn't move on" showed up lol. And below it, in text that Diane had added with a screen annotation app, posted from table 3, Bree Whitfield's assigned seat. The room turned. Bree was standing near the bar in her champagne dress, a fresh glass in her hand. and she had the specific expression of a person watching something they cannot stop. Diane returned to her seat, sat down with her champagne, and crossed her legs. Some people, she said pleasantly to no one in particular, really should turn off their location services. At 9:47 p.m., Audrey decided she had stayed long enough. The formal portion of the evening had quietly dissolved. Sloane was with her family in the private dining room adjacent to the main hall. Connor had not reappeared. The DJ was playing something low and ambient, and a small cluster of guests, who had apparently decided to continue celebrating regardless of circumstances, were moving near the dance floor with the determined cheerfulness of people committed to getting their money's worth. Audrey folded her cloth napkin and placed it beside her plate. She reached under her chair for her small clutch. She stood. Reed stood at the same time. "But you don't have to walk me out," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Over the course of the evening, her sense of him had been reorganizing itself. Not dramatically, not into something entirely new, but into something more accurate. She was seeing him clearly for possibly the first time. Not as Connor's friend, not as a peripheral figure in a story that had been mostly about loss, but as a person who had made mistakes he was fully aware of and was not trying to make smaller than they were. That was rarer than it should have been. She picked up her clutch and turned toward the exit. Reed fell into step beside her, not touching, just present. They moved through the thinning room toward the corridor that led to the entrance. At the edge of the hallway, just before the turn, Audrey stopped. She wasn't sure why. Some instinct about thresholds, about the difference between the space inside this building and the space outside it. Reed stopped beside her. He turned to face her. In the quieter light of the hallway, away from the chandeliers and the candles and the ambient performance of a wedding evening, he looked very much like himself. No occasion, no role. Just a man who had something to say and had been waiting for the right moment long enough that the moment had started to pass him by. He looked at her. "I want to marry you," he said. Quietly, without decoration, not from alcohol, not from the emotion of the evening. She could see the difference. She had learned to see the difference. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked, "Since when?" And the way she asked it, careful, honest, genuinely wanting to know, was the first door she had opened for him all night. Sloane was in the small corridor outside the private dining room when Audrey found her. She had changed out of the wedding dress, or rather, someone had brought her a change of clothes, because the dress was too structured to simply remove without help. And there was something in Sloane's posture that made clear she was no longer willing to wear it. She was in a simple cream blouse and tailored trousers now. Her hair was still up. Her engagement ring was not on her hand. She looked, Audrey thought, like someone who had just put down something very heavy and was still adjusting to the absence of its weight. They stood in the corridor for a moment, neither of them sure exactly how this should go. There was no social framework for this particular situation. The etiquette guides did not cover it. "How are you?" Audrey asked. Sloane thought about it, actually thought about it, which Audrey appreciated. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think I will be fine. I think I just can't feel that clearly right now." Audrey nodded. She knew that state well. "I want to say I'm sorry," Sloane said, "for the way you were treated tonight. The table, your name card. That wasn't something I chose or knew about." "I know," Audrey said. "I could tell." Sloane looked at her directly. "He talked about you sometimes. Never in the way a person talks about someone they're completely over." She paused. "I think I knew something wasn't right for a long time." I just believed what I was shown instead of what I felt. Audrey was quiet for a moment. For 4 years, she said carefully, I thought the problem was that I wasn't enough, that I was too small for his life. It took me until tonight to understand that the problem was never about size. She looked at Sloane. He needed people to be less than him. That's a need you can't fix. You can only stop paying for it. Sloane absorbed this. Then she straightened. Small adjustment. Decisive. My father's going to call you Monday, she said. I told him to. She paused. You read that contract in 10 minutes. He's been looking for someone like you for 2 years. The Brooklyn Bridge at 10:30 on an October night was cold and bright and almost entirely empty. They walked without discussing where they were going. Audrey had turned left out of the River Cafe, and Reed had followed, and somehow the bridge was where they ended up, which felt appropriate in the way that things feel appropriate when you are done pretending a situation is something other than what it is. The East River moved below them, black and silver, catching the lights from both shores. Manhattan glittered on the far side, the skyline doing what it always did, which was exist in a way that made smaller problems feel instructively small, and larger problems feel genuinely enormous. They walked to the midpoint of the pedestrian path and stopped. You didn't answer, Reed said. In the hallway, I said, since when, and you asked since when, and I answered, and then you didn't say anything. I know, Audrey said. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I know that too. She leaned her forearms on the cable railing. The wind off the river was sharp. Her navy dress was not warm enough for this, and she was not going to say so. Reed shrugged off his suit jacket and placed it over her shoulders without ceremony. She did not argue with him about it. You're going to call Marcus Mercer on Monday, he said. Not a question. Yes. And after that? Audrey looked at the bridge cables, the enormous geometry of them, each wire doing exactly its one job so that the whole thing held. After that, I'm going to figure out what comes next, the way I always have. Alone? She turned her head to look at him. In the bridge light, with the city behind him and the river below and the October cold moving between them, Reed Calloway looked like a man who had finally stopped rehearsing something and was simply standing in front of it. You waited 2 years to say what you said tonight, she told him. Yes. Don't make me wait that long for whatever comes next. Reed looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, but fully, the way something settles when it finally finds its level. He placed his hand beside hers on the railing, not holding, just there. And Audrey did not move her hand away. The offices of Mercer's Strategic Group occupied the 14th floor of a glass building on Varick Street in Soho. And on the first Monday of April, they were full of the particular organized energy of a firm that had recently restructured and was still finding its new rhythm. Audrey Callahan's desk was near the east-facing windows. She had been there for 4 months. Her title was Contract Language Specialist, a role that Marcus Mercer had invented for her, and then immediately realized he should have invented several years earlier. She read the language that lived between the legal team and the communications team. She found the places where intention and wording had drifted apart. She was, by every available measure, very good at it. On her desk, a Starbucks cup going cold because she kept forgetting to drink it. Her Kindle, face down, open to a novel she had been reading in lunch breaks, a small stack of contracts flagged with color-coded tabs, and a moleskin notebook, dark green, well used, not hers. It had arrived 3 weeks ago in an envelope with no note. She had recognized Reed's handwriting on the outside. Inside, The notebook was filled with his architectural sketches and occasional written observations, the visual and verbal shorthand of a person working through ideas. She had flipped through it slowly, not sure what she was looking for, until she reached a page near the back, dated the night of the wedding, after she had left. He had sketched the bridge, quickly, from memory, but accurate, and below it, in handwriting that was slightly less controlled than the rest, as though written fast before the thought could be revised away. She walked in wearing a simple dress, and the whole room rearranged itself, and she didn't even notice. That's the thing about her. She never knows how much space she takes up. She thinks she's taking up none. I should have told her that 2 years ago. I'm going to tell her now. Audrey had read it 4 times that first morning. She had called him that afternoon. They were having dinner on Thursday and Friday, and the Thursday after that. On her desk, beside the notebook, was the name Card. Beside the notebook was the name card from the wedding. Cream-colored, gold lettering, the name written wrong. She had kept it, not as a wound, as a reminder that she had walked into the hardest room of her year and walked out with everything that actually mattered. So the story has finally come to a close. And if you're still here with me right now, I just want to say, that means something. It really does. Because, let's be honest, you didn't stay for the drama. You stayed because some part of this story touched something real inside you. However, maybe you've been Audrey, sitting in a room where someone made you feel invisible, wearing your quiet dignity like armor because it was the only thing left. Maybe you've been Reed, someone who knew the truth and stayed silent too long, and now carries that weight. Maybe you've been Sloan, someone who believed what they were shown instead of what they felt. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Every door that closed on Audrey, the job, the table in the corner, the name written wrong, became the exact path that led her somewhere real. And Stoicism teaches us this: we cannot control what people do to us. We can only control who we choose to become afterward. Audrey didn't win because she fought louder. She won because she never stopped being herself in a room that kept asking her to shrink. That's the lesson. Stay whole, stay honest. The right things and the right people find you when you stop pretending to be smaller than you are. If this story moved you in any way, please give it a like, leave a comment about which moment hit you hardest, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. There are more people like Audrey whose stories deserve to be told, and you deserve to hear every single one. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and emotional storytelling purposes. All characters, names, locations, events, and dialogue, including Audrey Callahan, Connor Whitfield, Reed Calloway, Sloan Mercer, and all supporting characters, are entirely fictional and the product of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental and unintentional. The venues and brand names mentioned throughout this story, including the River Cafe, Barnes & Noble, Starbucks, and others, are referenced solely as part of the fictional narrative setting and do not represent any endorsement, sponsorship, or affiliation with this channel. The emotional themes explored in this story, including workplace manipulation, financial hardship, and relationship betrayal, are dramatized for narrative purposes. If you or someone you know is experiencing a difficult personal situation, please reach out to a trusted person or professional support service in your community. This content is intended for mature audiences and is produced with respect, care, and a commitment to honest storytelling.